Hello, I'm Ed Fuquay, young adult librarian extraordinaire here at Woonsocket Harris Public Library.
And I'm Michaela, human being here at Woonsocket Harris Public Library.
So last week we talked about Arthur Conan Doyle and his creation Sherlock Holmes.
Sherlock Holmes.
Yes. Now, being one of the most popular fictional characters of all time, and currently in public domain, although he's still trademarked, it's not surprising that other people wanted to write Sherlock Holmes stories too.
This is the biggest stack I think
yes,
we've ever had.
Yes, this is huge, and this doesn't even scratch the surface. This is such an enormous topic. We could do an entire ongoing series of spin-offs, parodies, adaptations of Sherlock Holmes.
Oh, we'd be sitting here talking for 20 years.
Yeah. I thought I was going to reach into my collection at home where I kind of have a Sherlockian collection, and then I realized I have more than enough right here at the library to stock, the entire episode without even touching my own personal collection. There are Sherlock Holmes encyclopedias. There are several different biographies of Sherlock Holmes, fictional biographies of a fictional character,
Yes.
Go figure. There are 2 different annotated editions with different sets of footnotes for all the stories. There are numerous parodies. There's variations of Sherlock Holmes, any variation you can possibly imagine. There's tons of humorous ones.
Oh yeah, he's been on SNL. He's, the Pythons have portrayed him. They're just, he's been everywhere in every genre.
Absolutely. There's a set of stories in which Sherlock and Watson are gay.
Yep.
Not just, subtext, but really gay.
I think I've read that fan fiction.
Yeah. This is published. So
yes.
yeah. And like I said, there are so many books, movies, television shows, it is impossible to absolutely cover them all. We're going to skim the surface with things that have jumped out at myself and Michaela. I read somewhere that there were over 200 Sherlock Holmes films just in the silent era alone, all of which are lost.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And Conan Doyle, when he was alive, got to actually read some of these pastiches and parodies written by other people, some of which he sued over.
Well, it is his character. It's proprietary. While he's still living, at least give the man let him die first, and then do what you will.
In 1899, when William Gillette was working on his play of Sherlock Holmes, it became hugely famous. He toured around the world with it. He had an original story, so that was a Sherlock Holmes pastiche, and he wanted to have Holmes fall in love and marry at the end of it. So he sent a telegram to Conan Doyle asking if he had permission to do that. And Doyle's response was, "You can marry him, kill him, do whatever you damn well please." So Conan Doyle did have kind of a laissez-faire attitude towards adaptations of his character. He wasn't that strict. Right now, he's in public domain as a character, but the image of Sherlock Holmes with the deerstalker cap and the magnifying glass, things like that, are trademarked.
Yeah.
Yeah. And some Holmes stories are still copyrighted and not in public domain yet, the later ones that Doyle wrote. So
okay. All right, so yes and no. He's in the public domain.
It's tricky, yeah.
Well, I know, like we said, there's so many adaptations. I foolishly tried to compose a list of all of the different shows and books and everything. I think I gave up on page 8 and just deleted the whole thing. It was too much.
Far too many. There have been thousands and thousands of Sherlock Holmes stories.
Far too much. Far too many, but not enough.
Yeah.
So I think we'll just hit on some of the favorites, some of the ones that really, really stand out. One of my favorite adaptations of Sherlock Holmes is the BBC, it's pretty recent, this show, Sherlock, where Sherlock Holmes is played by Benedict Cumberbatch, and of course Martin Freeman plays Dr. Watson. And although it's a modern retelling of the, different Sherlock Holmes stories, and it is very different, the world that they're in, it feels like one of the most genuine retellings of the Sherlock stories, just for how true the actors
I was very impressed the
them.
first few episodes. I did tire of it quickly, I discovered.
Yeah, well, also it takes 2 years for 3 episodes to come out, so it's hard to keep up excitement when it's just so long and few and far between. But those early episodes especially, very, very true to what I feel is the soul of Sherlock Holmes. And of course it follows them just running around modern day Britain solving crimes. Very, very well written. Highly recommend anybody who hasn't seen it to check it out, especially if you're just trying to get your toes wet in Sherlock.
That's brought a whole new generation of people who've never read Doyle's original stories into the Sherlock Holmes universe.
My sister watched it, and she was just like, "Did you know it's a book?"
Yeah.
I think I did. Yeah, so we have a lot of different adaptations. We were talking, we'll talk briefly about it, just because the mouse. But of course, there is the great Mouse Detective. I think this was my earliest introduction into Sherlock Holmes as a child. It, of course, follows a mouse version of our dear Sherlock Holmes as he goes through and tries to solve a mystery and be the good guy.
The books are called Basil of Baker Street.
Basil of Baker Street.
And the books are good, but the Disney movie is just brilliant.
It's so good. It's so good. Definitely a Disney classic. I mean, when does Disney not hit it out of the park?
Yeah.
But
my favorite part was, as a kid, I grew up watching the Basil Rathbone, Nigel Bruce Sherlock Holmes, which are flawed in a lot of ways, but Basil Rathbone's always stuck in my memory. And in the Disney cartoon, Basil lives in the same P-21B, and we actually hear dialogue from the old Universal films played as Basil scurries back and forth across the wainscoting to solve his mystery. So they're literally living, so this is actually taking place while the Basil Rathbone Sherlock Holmes are going on.
It's a Sherlock Holmes within a Sherlock Holmes.
Yes, I love that.
It's so good. It's just definitely a very creative retelling as well. Which you can always rely on Disney for something colorful and creative, and definitely this one is close to my heart. I love The Great Mouse Detective. As far as modern retellings go, I know there has been the show Elementary, where you've got Sherlock Holmes, and then Dr. Watson is played by Lucy Liu,
who's fantastic.
She's phenomenal.
She's never bad.
Listen, everything she touches turns to gold. She's amazing.
That was on the air at the same time as Sherlock, so we had like a sudden golden age of Sherlock Holmes retellings.
Revitalization completely.
And then around the same time, the movie came out.
Yes, with Robert Downey Jr.
With Robert Downey Jr., which was in many ways a bold revisionist retelling, but also stuck really close to its roots.
It was Victorian. It was very Victorian. I will give it that. I really liked what Robert Downey Jr. did with the character. It was grittier. It was less as Hollywoodized as the stories were. He really played it as a gritty Sherlock, which, that's what he was. He boxed, he fought, he was down on the streets with the common folk, even though he was this insane mental powerhouse.
I absolutely adore the sequence in which all through the film things have happened. They're never properly explained. Things just happen. And then toward the end of the film, he just sits there and ticks off exactly how everything occurred from beginning to end, because he's known all along, of course.
Yes, exactly. I love the fight sequence where he slowly breaks down everything that the person is going to do. There are, of course, some really comedic retellings as well. There is, of course, Elementary, My Dear Watson, where you have John Cleese, who's one of the Monty Python members, playing Sherlock, and he's just completely over the top, ridiculous, very, very energetic. There's just so much you could do with this character. There's so much
Peter
meat
Cook
there.
and Dudley Moore back in the 60s also did a version of Hound of the Baskervilles. That's just hysterical.
I need to check that out. I don't think I've seen that one.
It's a classic. Peter Cook is actually really good as Holmes.
Well, I believe it. I absolutely believe it. But there is this sort of like manic energy that comes with this insane mental force that is Sherlock Holmes, that lets people play into the comedy of it. Even the novels themselves, there are brilliant moments of comedy within them. It really affords the opportunity to just be really funny, just play into it, especially those moments when, of course, Sherlock is wrong. And
there's also the element of like tragedy that Sherlock goes through. The Jeremy Brett Sherlock Holmes the BBC did, really well done. And Jeremy Brett in real life was a manic depressive. And he brought both his manic energy and his depressed side to the character. He very much became Sherlock Holmes as he filmed those episodes.
That's awesome.
For both good and ill, because it took a real toll on his health.
But for the performance.
I know, So going through my research, like I said, things came out while Doyle was still alive. One of the earliest ones that I know of was a guy named Maurice Leblanc in France. So it is a series of books about Arsène Lupin, who's a French thief. He's the ultimate thief. He's very suave and so forth, being French. I found the Lupin stories, he's kind of smug and pretentious, so he's not my favorite character. But Leblanc had to pit him against like the famous detective in the world, who he cleverly disguised by calling him Sherlock Holmes. So assuming Doyle would never suspect.
How could he? It's so different.
It was tough because his hero Lupin is the crook, and so he wanted his hero to get away naturally. But he couldn't really make Holmes look that bad in a lot of ways. And it was so popular, he did a whole cycle of stories involving Holmes and Lupin. And I had one here in the library that I own, but it's checked out right now, so I can't show it to you.
Hey, listen, somebody is learning about this. That's excellent.
My favorite of the Sherlock Holmes pastiches, because it was the first one that I read, was this one, which did come back into print recently. Sherlock Holmes's War of the Worlds. I was like 10 years old and I ran across this book in a drugstore in Bowling Green, Kentucky, and I bought it immediately. And it's basically the story of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. It just shows you what Holmes was doing, and Professor Challenger, who was Conan Doyle's other great character, Professor Challenger. We didn't even get a chance to talk about him. So I'm reading that book as a kid. I'm thinking, well, of course Sherlock Holmes wasn't sitting on his hands during the Martian invasion. He was running around doing stuff. And who else would he team up with but Professor Challenger? Because clearly they know each other.
Of course.
They move in the same circles. So so Holmes and Challenger are racing across, England ahead of the Martian tripods. And, Wellman isn't the greatest Sherlockian. There's a few things that ring falsely, but I forgive that because the whole idea is so fantastic and so really well done.
That's awesome.
But in the world of pastiches, the one that really became most famous, and people have always done Sherlock Holmes stories.
Yeah.
But in the 1970s, I believe, Nicholas Meyer did 7% Solution. And that one took the world by storm. It was a bestseller. It was sold to the movies. When I read it, I kind of didn't really like it. Now, you mentioned Holmes's drug addiction.
Yes, it's something that's really prevalent in the novels, but they don't really touch on, obviously they're not going to touch on it in the Disney.
Clearly.
But a lot of the retellings, they just kind of wash it away. I understand for the Hollywood, you've got children going to these movies as well. You don't want to portray this hero as a drug addict, but it's true. That's the character. That's how he was. It was to stimulate his mind, and that was the Victorian idea. It was just viewed as a vice. Modern day, he would just be seen as a drinker.
Well, looked at it from a modern point of view. Nicholas Meyer studied that and came up with the idea that Holmes's long-term drug addiction eventually had a detrimental effect on his intellect. So in 7% Solution, Sherlock is running around, looking looking less and less reasonable, and warning about the dangers of Moriarty. How he's out to kill us, Watson. You must be careful. Always be on your guard. And so he's so over the top that Watson starts to suspect. So he investigates and discovers that Moriarty is actually like Holmes's old math teacher. And Holmes has reached such a bad state mentally that he's starting to have delusions. And he imagines his old math professor is stalking him and trying to kill him. And when you read the final bow, you notice that Watson never sees Moriarty do anything. Watson is never present. He's only told Moriarty did this, Moriarty did that. It's oh my God, that almost makes sense. But it also made me feel really horrible because I didn't want to read a story about a junkie Sherlock Holmes. But fortunately, Nicholas Meyer is a superbly good writer. He also wrote and directed the best Star Trek film, Wrath of Khan, by the way. So he's multi-talented.
Okay, yep.
So naturally, Watson packs Holmes up, and they go off to Vienna to find the world's greatest expert on cocaine and psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud.
Of course.
So Sigmund Freud psychoanalyzes him and gets him off his coke addiction. And of course, to prove that he is his old self again, he has to solve a diabolical murder and expose a dangerous conspiracy by the end of the story, and that sort of thing. And he went on to write several other Sherlock Holmes stories in which Holmes is not a drug-addicted person. And one of them was a crossover with, he fights the Phantom of the Opera.
I need that one.
There are 4 stories of Sherlock Holmes going up against the Phantom of the Opera.
There are 4?
There are 4.
Why don't I have any of them in front of me?
I tried to make a list of these things, and it's almost impossible. He's fought Dracula at least 3 times. Because Holmes and Dracula are obviously very closely tied together.
They exist in somewhat the same time period, so of course you need a good Sherlock versus Dracula. Where's that movie? That's the movie I want to see.
He's also fought Jack the Ripper at least 6 times in books, twice in film. One of my favorite Holmes films is Murder by Decree with Christopher Plummer as Sherlock Holmes, in which he exposes the Whitechapel conspiracy. His resolution is the same one that Alan Moore would later come to in From Hell. And Study in Terror, where he fights Jack the Ripper again, this one with a different resolution. And the Study in Terror book adaptation was done by Ellery Queen.
Oh, wow.
And the Ellery Queen version is a story within a story where Ellery Queen, the character, is reading a manuscript left behind by Watson, but it's left unfinished. So Ellery Queen has to solve the mystery by going through what Watson jotted down and piecing together just as Holmes would.
That's excellent.
Very cool.
But yeah, no, it's just, I still can't get over the stacks on the table.
Yeah, I know.
I see Doctor Who.
Yes,
there,
this is brilliant. The book is written by Andy Lane. It's out of print right now, but fortunately it was adapted for audio by Big Finish Productions, whom I highly recommend. Big Finish does amazing stuff with Doctor Who. This is an adventure of the Sylvester McCoy Doctor. So the Doctor and Ace team up with Sherlock Holmes and Watson. A stolen library book leads to a mystery that involves something that is disturbingly like the Cthulhu mythos. So if you ever wanted to see the Doctor and Sherlock Holmes fight Cthulhu, I highly recommend All-Consuming Fire by Andy Lane.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I tried to figure out not only how many Sherlock Holmes pastiches that there are, but I think every single person who appeared in a Sherlock Holmes story went on to solve his own mysteries. That's how good Sherlock is. It's a series of mysteries in which Mary Watson, Watson's wife, solves a few murders. It's a series where Mrs. Hudson solves crimes, which she's not, dusting and running the vacuum cleaner. There's at least 2 different series about Irene Adler. The best one is by Carol Nelson Douglas. Very good. Good Night, Mr. Holmes is the first one.
Excellent.
There are the Mary Russell stories by Laura King, in which Holmes unexpectedly gets married as an old man to a fiery young woman, and they go around the world having adventures. So they're very highly recommended. I haven't actually read them myself yet. There's some celebrity Sherlock Holmes fans that took me by surprise. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, basketball star. Huge Sherlock Holmes fan. He said in an interview he used to carry copies of Holmes with him when he went on tour with the NBA all the time. He had it stuffed in a suitcase.
That's awesome.
So now that he's retired from basketball and become a professional writer, he decided to sit down and write his own Sherlock Holmes story. The first one was called Mycroft Holmes, and it looks at things from Mycroft's point of view. In the first story, Mycroft is just starting out with the foreign. He's on the foreign desk, and his goal at that point in life is just to become a mid-level clerk. That's all he really wants from life. And his little brother Sherlock is still in school, and he's very nervous that Sherlock's obsession with murder and violence is not going to have a good ending. He's very worried about poor Sherlock. But before too long, he's drawn into a mystery. And then the second one is Sherlock and Mycroft, where the two of them are forced to join forces and overcome their mutual differences. They both have a similar passion for justice. Mycroft is too smart not to notice what's going on when the papers cross his foreign desk, so he constantly involves himself with things above his pay grade, gradually working his way up to become the Mycroft we all know and love. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, great writer, excellent Sherlockian. Stephen Fry. Do you know how big a Sherlock Holmes fan Stephen Fry is?
I know he's a fan. I don't know how big of a fan
he is. He is the youngest member of the Baker Street Irregulars, the first official Sherlock Holmes fan club. He joined at 15.
15?
Yes. He presented a paper to them comparing and contrasting Moriarty with McTavish, the mystery cat from T.S. Eliot's Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats.
Excellent.
Later, as an adult, he says, they probably just felt sorry for me, but he is such a Sherlock Holmes fan. He's read the entire canon, backwards and forwards. He narrated a series of audiobooks for Audible.com.
Yes.
So if you're a member of Audible.com, you can download a copy of Stephen Fry reading every single Sherlock Holmes story, novels and short stories, and giving you his personal opinion on him. So it's exactly like sitting in front of a cozy fire with Stephen Fry talking about Sherlock Holmes with you. And there's really no more pleasant way to spend an evening, really.
Give me a cup of tea and that. That sounds lovely.
It is amazing. Derek Jacoby has also done all the Sherlock Holmes stories.
Oh my gosh.
Another fine actor, terrific voice. Do you have anything else before I dive into my pile? Because this is a big pile. Oh my goodness.
Listen, I thought I brought a lot today. And I'm loving hearing you talk about this. I'm learning so much.
Okay,
please tell me more.
All right, Moriarty.
Yes.
Such a popular character. There were 3 different Moriarty series running from different authors. The John Garner series, where Moriarty is still a black-hearted villain, but the story is just told from his point of view. Michael Kurland does a series in which Moriarty is more of an amoral anti-hero. He's not really evil. He said at one point, Sherlock thinks I'm evil because I'm smarter than him. So he basically he's he does odd jobs for the British government to
Yeah.
avoid being arrested and that kind of thing. So he and Sherlock are naturally always crossing paths. So yeah, Michael Curlin, very good writer, and one of my favorite writers of all time, Kim Newman, wrote a book called Hound of the D'Urbervilles, which is another story in which it stars Moriarty and Sebastian Moran, and Sebastian Moran narrates the stories, becoming essentially the Watson to Moriarty's Sherlock. And his Moriarty is a snarky masterpiece. He refers to the Holmes brothers as the fat man and the skinny man. He never actually deigns to call either Holmes by name. Yeah, and it's a great story because at no time does his Moriarty ever become a good guy, but at the same time, you feel for him in the end. You really do. He goes through so much. It always outwitted at the last minute by circumstances beyond his control. So yeah, Kim Newman's Hound of the D'Urbervilles, highly recommended, which by the way is not the same Moriarty who appears in his Anno Dracula series. Kim Newman also wrote the Anno Dracula series in which the fictional Sherlock Holmes characters also turn up, just to be confusing.
Just to be confusing, yeah.
Inspector Lestrade, whom Holmes referred to as the best of a bad lot, but he's good enough to star in his own series of mysteries, beginning with the supreme adventures of Inspector Lestrade.
If Mrs. Hudson gets to solve some mysteries, Lestrade
Clearly.
should get to. He's a detective.
A hitherto unknown sister, Enola Holmes.
Yes, I know that she got a Netflix special.
There's a Netflix series, a
yes.
Netflix movie starring her. They want to do a sequel. There's a whole series of books out about her. So there's the Enola Holmes series. Right now, Sherlock is used frequently in crossovers and team-ups.
Yes.
You want to team up two fictional characters, Sherlock Holmes in public domain, he can be adapted to almost anything. This is The Adventures of the Peerless Peer, in which Sherlock Holmes teams up with Tarzan of the Apes.
Oh my goodness.
Why not?
Why not? What jungle mystery though?
Yeah, they're in Africa, and it's right before World War I, so the Germans are active, and so forth and so on.
This is feeling like Indiana Jones meets Tarzan.
It is very much is.
Sherlock.
And just as an example, to just be slightly humorous, after writing this, Farmer discovered that he probably didn't actually have the rights to use Tarzan, so he wrote the story a second time, so the peer of the title is actually Mowgli from the Jungle Book. So he rewrote the story so Tarzan was replaced by Mowgli, and then discovered he really had the rights to Tarzan after all.
So there's two versions.
So there's two versions of Adventures of the Peerless Peer. Right now, Titan Books is doing a whole series of these, and they've got this one back in print again. 10 Years Beyond Baker Street, where Sherlock Holmes takes on the insidious Dr. Fu Manchu.
Oh my God.
Another, it's a story that had to happen with Fu Manchu running around Limehouse and Sherlock Holmes on Baker Street. But the one to end them all, Lauren Estelman, a very good mystery writer in his own right, has a whole series of mysteries on his own, also a Sherlock Holmes fan. So he did Sherlock Holmes versus Dracula, followed by Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Holmes.
Oh my goodness.
The two separate novels put together in one volume for convenience. He takes on Dracula again, and Dr. Jekyll.
Listen, two Victorian bad guys for one.
Yep. Yeah, because if you read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, it's written like a mystery. It's just that everyone in the English-speaking world knows the mystery. This is The Improbable Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, which are fantasy and science fiction stories involving Holmes, many of which are quite brilliant. This one contains Neil Gaiman's A Study in Emerald, because of course Neil Gaiman writes brilliant Sherlock Holmes stories.
I feel like if you're a great author, now prerequisite is you must at some point
write a Sherlock Holmes story.
Holmes story.
He's written at least two of them. I haven't read the other one. This one features A Study in Emerald, which is set in a mysteriously parallel universe where the Cthulhu mythos are worshipped as gods by the public. This is the adventures of yet another variation of Sherlock Holmes in that kind of universe.
I'm loving the Cthulhu crossovers.
There's a lot of Holmes Cthulhu. There's a whole series of Sherlock Holmes solving Cthulhu mysteries. There's a Sherlock Holmes computer game where he takes on a Cthulhu cult, and another computer game by the same company where he takes on Arsène Lupin again.
I'm so excited. I'm going to extend my library. I have to add some stuff to my library now.
And these are the crossovers that can't really take place in Doyle's own universe. But for stories that are actually like the canon, there's hundreds of anthologies of stories. The first one I ran across in the collection at the library If you think Sherlock Holmes is a great character, but he didn't spend nearly enough time with, like, plum pudding and Christmas trees, read Holmes for the Holidays, an entire anthology of nothing but Sherlock Holmes Christmas stories. So successful, it was followed a year later by a sequel, More Holmes for the Holidays.
Oh my goodness.
Fully authorized by the Conan Doyle estate.
I can't. That's excellent.
Yeah.
I'm so excited about this. I'm going to do some
One of my
reading.
favorite books in recent years, and I'm sorry if I'm babbling here.
No, it's okay.
The Strange Case of the Alchemist's Daughter by Theodora Ghost. Aside from Theodora Ghost being a fantastic name for anyone,
Yes.
let alone a writer, this is similar to League of Extraordinary Gentlemen by Alan Moore.
Yes.
I'm trying not to get into comic books because did you know Sherlock Holmes and Batman teamed up twice? They absolutely teamed up twice. In one of them, Batman is solving a mystery in London, and a mysterious old man shows up, keep giving him clues about things, and then Batman tries to corner him. In the end, he's vanished. So that's sort of a quasi crossover. Then another one that Mike Barr wrote is really a full-on team-up where Sherlock Holmes arrives and starts working on a case with Batman. At one point, Batman says, "But you're not real. You're a fictional character." And Holmes says, "Ah, yes, Batman, but you are real. Yet many people think that you are simply a fictional character. So why cannot a fictional character be real?" And Batman's like, "I'm not sure about that logic. What would you make of the cigarette ash?"
That's excellent. Well, I know Batman has a contingency plan for
he does.
all other
He absolutely
superheroes
does.
on the
Yeah.
planet. If they ever go evil, just so he can just kind of, and he has it for everyone, including Superman. I feel like Sherlock Holmes is the one person he wouldn't be able to come up with a brilliant enough contingency plan for, because he would just outthink it. He would just outthink it.
So Alan Moore's League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, fantastic comic book, mediocre movie. But the idea of that kind of a crossover inspired Theodora Ghost to do The Strange Case of the Alchemist's Daughter, about the League of Monstrous Gentlewomen, they're all female characters, many of whom she made up herself, but they're all tangentially created to characters from this period of fiction. It starts with Mary Jekyll, who discovers that her erstwhile father actually had a checkered past that she knew nothing about. And he took his own life and was implicated in several murders, and was also a member of a mysterious society of alchemists who were interested in conducting experiments to improve the human race through alchemy. She discovers that she herself is a product of that experiment, and that she has a half-sister she's never heard of, Diana Hyde. An extremely troubled young lady who's grown up in one of those workhouses for troubled orphans. She's a very troubled orphan. So Miss Jekyll and Miss Hyde join forces and discover there's a bunch of other people in London who have also been affected by this alchemical society, including a woman who's a result of Dr. Moreau's experiments, and also the lead character from Hawthorne's Rappaccini's daughter, a woman grown up in a poisonous environment who exudes poisonous toxins from her body, all part of the Alchemical Society's desire to create some sort of superwoman. And it's a 3-book series. So far it's a trilogy, but by the time the series is over, they've gone up against Ayesha from H. Rider Haggard's She, and they team up with Irene Adler, of course, and they fight Dracula, and so forth and so on. She uses all these old tropes, but they're all seen through the eyes of these young women struggling to make a name for themselves in Victorian England, a time when they're very much not a part of normal society. And Mary Riley meets Holmes, and Jekyll meets Holmes, and they wind up starting a romance. And the subtext is Dr. Jekyll's experiments involve splitting himself in two, not necessarily a good and an evil self, but a rational self and a bestial self. And each of his daughters that he fathers during that period represent that. So Mary is literally the product of Jekyll's rational self. She was born from pure logic and reason. And Holmes is attracted to her partly because of that.
Yeah. She's the perfect woman.
In many ways, yes. But it's handled very subtly. There's not a lot of hearts and flowers and romance and things like that. Also, the Bride of Frankenstein is in here, too.
Of course.
Yeah. And she starts to fall for Dorian Gray at one point. Everybody says, "You probably want to stay away from Dorian." And she's like, "Well, I'm 7 foot tall and have super strength. I think I'll be okay." The 3rd book comes to an end before the relationship gets any further, but I'm really hoping she writes more.
Yeah, no, that sounds amazing.
Yeah. It's a brilliant, and it showed, and again, all over again, these characters that are over 100 years old, and yet they're fresh and new. It's to like new, exciting stories about all these characters.
It feels like Sherlock kind of ties them all together.
He does.
He is the detective. So if you can write a mystery, there is probably a place for Sherlock Holmes in there somewhere.
Yeah, there has to be.
Yeah.
He defines the detective, and he also defines that period of England. For good or ill, that was a time when things happened. That was such a generation of energy. Alan Moore and Kim Newman drawing on all these Victorian literature tropes, because how can you not do it? There was so much good material being produced in that period. I have a book at home by Jess Nevins called The Encyclopedia of Fantastic Victoriana that is literally an encyclopedia of fantasy and science fiction stories written in the Victorian era, and it's like 400 pages. It was too heavy to bring to work. And he's now come out with a second volume that's so heavy no publisher will print it in paper, so it's only available as an ebook.
Oh my goodness.
Publishers don't print books that big anymore. So that's how much material there is to work with in the Victorian age. And Holmes, no matter what you do about the Victorian era, Holmes is at the center of it. Whether he appears or not, it's always a Sherlock Holmes story.
Yeah. No, I mean, you can't think of that era without, evoking images of Holmes and his deerstalker cap and pipe.
Yeah, that's a universal thing. He's the most recognized character all around the world. We can't even get into the cycle of Sherlock Holmes imitators. The American Sherlock Holmes, there's a Sherlock Holmes in Japan, a Sherlock Holmes in India, all written by authors from that country that created their own version of Sherlock Holmes, because he's that universal character. He literally speaks to everyone all the way around the world.
Yeah.
Which is so unique and so special.
He's a great unifier. He really is.
He brings everyone together.
Excellent. He's one of the most wonderful characters ever written.
Absolutely.
And it's just wonderful to see the impact. I mean, look at this table. This is only scratching
this is only
the
a
surface.
Tiny fraction.
This is a teeny tiny little fraction, and just the impact that he's had, that Arthur Conan Doyle has had. I feel like we should end on thanking Arthur Conan Doyle.
He did such an amazing job, and I'm not sure if we ever fully understood why people loved Holmes so much.
No, well, writing this character, it feels a lot like art, and an artist rarely knows the impact that their art will have until long after they're gone.
Yeah.
So
long after he's gone, he still has an amazing impact on the world.
No, absolutely. So thank you, Arthur Conan Doyle.
Thank you.
Wherever you are in the ether or non-existence.
Well, he believed in the afterlife. Toward the end of his life, he became a spiritualist. So he definitely believed in the afterlife. So he thinks he's out there somewhere.
He thinks he's out there somewhere. So thank you, Arthur Conan Doyle.
So until next time, I've been Ed.
I've been Michaela.
Be safe.
Be happy, be healthy.
Bye.
Bye.